She was 22, studying photography at a small liberal arts college in Tennessee. She had dreams of traveling the world, capturing moments that told stories without words. That summer, she decided to take a road trip through the southern states. Her goal? To photograph forgotten places, abandoned houses, ghost towns, overgrown trails, places where history lingered in silence. Black Pine Forest was on her list. She arrived in Hollow Creek a few days before she vanished, stayed at a small motel near the edge of town, talked to locals about the forest, its beauty, its mystery. They warned her not to go in alone. Some even offered to guide her. She refused. "I need to feel it for myself," she said. So she walked in. She posted a few photos on Instagram the next day, mist curling around ancient trunks, light filtering through the canopy, shadows dancing across the leaves, beautiful, eerie. Then, nothing. Her phone was never found. Her camera was never recovered. Only the photos remained. And then there was Detective Marcus Hale, lead investigator on the case, a man who had spent over 2 decades chasing down leads, solving cold cases, and putting away criminals. When Carl was arrested, Hale was the one who sat across from him during questioning. He watched Carl's eyes as he spoke, looking for cracks, for regret, for any sign that this man understood what he had done. But Carl only smiled. "You think I'm a killer," he said quietly, hands folded neatly on the table. "But I'm not. I'm a guide." "A guide?" Hale asked. "Yes, for those who are already lost." Hale leaned forward. "You took lives, Carl." Carl shook his head slowly. "I ended wanderings." The detective didn't respond right away. Something about the way Carl spoke unsettled him. Not because it sounded insane, but because somewhere in there it almost made sense. After the trial, Hale visited the forest. Not officially. Just him, a flashlight, and a notebook. He wanted to see for himself. As he walked deeper in, the air grew colder. The trees seemed taller, the silence heavier. And then, just as he reached the clearing where the bodies had been found, he heard it. A voice. Soft. Whispering. "Are you lost?" He turned quickly, heart pounding. Nothing was there. Just the trees, the wind, and the echo of a question that would follow him for the rest of his life. Now, let me tell you what happens when someone dares to enter the forest today. If you visit Hollow Creek, you'll find that the town has changed. Not much, just enough. A new gas station, a few more tourists. But the forest, it remains untouched, unforgiving. Some say Carl's influence lingers. Every once in a while, someone goes in, usually alone, usually curious, and sometimes they come back. But not quite the same. They talk about things they saw, things they heard. A man standing between the trees, watching, waiting. And if you ask them if they heard the whisper, they don't answer right away. Because they're afraid. Afraid that if they speak it aloud, it might call to them again. Are you lost? Next story is, she left one message before vanishing, never go to room 3. It all started with a simple message scrawled in black marker on the back of a hotel notepad. The note read, "Never go to room 3. No explanation, no signature, just those 5 chilling words left behind by a young woman named Emily Carter. Emily had arrived at the Maplewood Inn late one Friday evening after driving nonstop from Atlanta to Birmingham. She was tired but eager to explore the small town where her cousin lived. Her plan was straightforward: spend the night, rest up, and visit family the next day. But she never made it out of the inn. When Emily checked into the hotel, everything seemed normal. A quiet lobby, friendly staff, and a warm welcome from the desk clerk, Mr. Thompson, who greeted her with a smile. He handed her key card for room 14, explaining that it was on the 2nd floor near the elevators. "Let me know if you need anything," he said cheerfully as she signed the guest book. Emily thanked him politely and headed upstairs. She dragged her suitcase down the dimly lit hallway, humming softly to herself as she went. When she reached room 14, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. At first glance, the room looked ordinary. Double bed covered in a beige quilt, a small wooden desk with a lamp, and a television mounted on the wall. There was nothing unusual about it, or so she thought. That night, however, something strange happened. Around midnight, Emily woke suddenly to the sound of footsteps outside her door. At first, she assumed it was another guest returning late to their room, but then the steps stopped directly across the hall. Her curiosity piqued. Emily peeked through the peephole. What she saw chilled her to the bone. There, standing in front of room 3, was a figure cloaked entirely in shadow. Its outline was hazy, almost translucent, as though it didn't belong in this world. For several seconds or perhaps minutes, time felt distorted. It simply stood there, unmoving. Then, without warning, it disappeared. Shaken, Emily grabbed the hotel notepad from the desk and wrote down the cryptic warning, "Never go to room 3. She intended to show it to Mr. Blank Thompson in the morning, hoping he could explain what she'd witnessed. But when dawn came, Emily wasn't there. The next morning, Mr. Thompson noticed something odd during his routine check of occupied rooms. Room 14 showed no signs of movement. The curtains remained closed, and the door handle didn't budge when he tried turning it gently. Concerned, he used his master key to enter. Inside, he found the room exactly as Emily had left it the previous night. Her suitcase sat open on the bed, clothes still folded neatly inside. On the desk lay the notepad with its ominous message. But Emily herself was nowhere to be found. Alarmed, Mr. Thompson called the police immediately. Officers arrived within the hour, searching both the room and the surrounding area. They questioned other guests and staff members, but turned up empty-handed. No one had seen Emily leave the building, nor had anyone heard any unusual noises during the night. As the investigation unfolded, detectives discovered something peculiar. While room 3 existed physically, it was located directly across from room 14. It hadn't been rented out for over 20 years. In fact, according to hotel records, it had been permanently sealed off due to structural damage caused by a fire decades earlier. Yet, despite being inaccessible, the door to room 3 bore faint scratch marks around its edges, as though someone or something had attempted to force it open recently. Confused and intrigued, Detective James Reed decided to investigate further. He brought in forensic experts to examine the area and even consulted paranormal researchers, though such measures were met with skepticism from his superiors. Meanwhile, rumors began spreading through the town. Some claimed Emily had run away, unable to cope with personal issues. Others whispered darker possibilities that she had fallen victim to something unnatural lurking within the walls of the Maplewood Inn. Weeks passed, then months. Despite extensive searches, neither Emily nor any evidence of foul play surfaced. Her disappearance became yet another unsolved mystery filed away in dusty archives. Or so everyone believed. Years later, a new employee joined the Maplewood Inn team. His name was Daniel Hayes, a recent college graduate looking for steady work while figuring out his career path. Young and ambitious, Daniel threw himself into his duties, quickly earning praise from management for his dedication. One evening, while closing up the front desk, Daniel noticed a group of tourists checking in. Among them was a woman in her early 30s with striking green eyes and jet black hair. She introduced herself as Claire Bennett and requested a specific room number. "Room 14, please," she said confidently, handing over her credit card. Daniel hesitated. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but room 14 is currently undergoing maintenance. Would you mind staying in room 7 instead?" Claire frowned but nodded reluctantly. "Sure, that works." Later that night, as Daniel prepared to lock up, he noticed something odd. A piece of paper slid under the front desk, landing silently at his feet. Curious, he picked it up and unfolded it. On the page, written in shaky handwriting, were the same 5 words Emily had left behind years ago. "Never go to room 3. Chills ran down Daniel's spine. He glanced toward the staircase leading to the second floor, half expecting to see someone standing there. But the hallway was empty. Determined to uncover the truth, Daniel ventured upstairs cautiously. As he approached room 3, he noticed the same scratch marks Detective Reed had documented years earlier. They appeared fresh, as though they'd been made moments ago. Summoning his courage, Daniel pressed his ear against the door, listening intently. From beyond the wood, he heard faint whisper-soft, indistinct voices murmuring in unison. The sound sent shivers coursing through his body. Before he could retreat, the door creaked open slowly, revealing a darkened interior illuminated only by moonlight streaming through a cracked window. Inside, the air felt colder, heavier, suffocating. And then, just as Daniel stepped inside, the whispers grew louder, forming a single repeated phrase, "You shouldn't have come here." Back at the front desk, Claire waited anxiously, pacing back and forth. Something about the inn unsettled her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. When Daniel finally returned, pale-faced and trembling, she demanded answers. "What's going on?" she asked sharply. Daniel hesitated before speaking. "There's something wrong with room 3. I think whoever stays here doesn't leave." Claire stared at him, disbelief etched across her features. "Are you serious? This isn't some prank, is it?" "No," Daniel replied firmly. "I swear it's true, and now I think you might know more than you're letting on." Reluctantly, Claire admitted the truth. Years ago, she had stayed at the Maplewood Inn under a different name. Like Emily, she too had encountered the shadowy figure outside room 3 and written the same warning. But unlike Emily, she had managed to escape barely. Together, Daniel and Claire resolved to solve the mystery once and for all. Armed with flashlights and recording equipment borrowed from local paranormal enthusiasts, they entered room 3 determined to confront whatever dwelled within. What they found defied explanation. In the center of the room stood a Miraran antique piece with ornate gold framing and a surface marred by cracks. Surrounding it were remnants of rituals, long-forgotten burnt candles, scattered herbs, and symbols etched into the floorboards. As they examined the artifacts, the temperature plummeted further. Shadows danced along the walls, taking shape and form. And then, emerging from the mirror itself, came the figure, the same one Emily and Claire had seen years ago. Its presence filled the room with dread. It spoke not with words, but with emotions raw and overwhelming. Grief, anger, regret. Through careful observation and research, Daniel and Claire eventually uncovered the tragic history of Room 3. Decades prior, a young mother had taken her own life in despair after losing her child to illness. Bound by guilt and sorrow, her spirit remained trapped between worlds, luring others into her eternal torment. With the help of a seasoned medium, they performed a ritual to release the tormented soul, allowing it to find peace at last. Afterward, the Maplewood Inn returned to normalcy. Guests checked in and out without incident. Yet, deep within its walls, remnants of the past lingered a reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved. And whenever someone asks about Room 3, the staff always replies with the same advice: never go to Room 3. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. On a quiet, moonless night, a young driver named John found himself cruising alone on a desolate stretch of road, far from the lights and noise of the bustling city. The highway was long and empty, lined with thick, shadowy trees that seemed to swallow up the dim light from his car's headlights. The silence around him was eerie, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional sound of tires rolling over the cracked asphalt. It was the kind of road where time felt suspended, and the loneliness of the journey could easily make one's thoughts drift into the unknown. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? John had been driving for hours, heading toward a small town on the outskirts. He had been on the road for so long that the passing landscape had become a blur of shadows, trees, and occasional roadside markers. The monotony of the drive was starting to get to him, but he couldn't help but press forward. There was something oddly calming about the solitude, even though the dark surroundings began to weigh on him as the night deepened. As he drove through a particularly secluded area of the highway, his eyes caught a flicker of movement on the side of the road. He squinted, trying to make out what it was. There, standing on the shoulder, was a figura young woman, dressed in a long, white, somewhat tattered dress. Her back was turned and her head was slightly bowed, as though she were lost in thought or waiting for someone. John's first instinct was to pass by, but something about the sight of her in the middle of nowhere stopped him. The road was deserted, and it didn't make sense that someone would be out there, alone and stranded. John slowed the car and rolled down his window, the cold night air rushing in. He leaned out, squinting to get a better look at the woman. "Are you all right?" He called out, his voice cutting through the silence. The woman slowly turned her head toward him, and their eyes met. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes seemed distant, as if they held secrets John couldn't fathom. Her lips barely parted as she spoke in a soft, almost inaudible voice. "I'm lost," she said. "Can you give me a ride? I need to get to my house." John hesitated for a moment, but then, feeling a sudden surge of compassion, he unlocked the passenger door and gestured for her to come inside. "Of course. It's too dangerous to be out here alone," he replied. The woman gave him a small, faint smile and opened the door to get in. As she slid into the car, John immediately noticed the strange chill that seemed to surround her, like the temperature had dropped several degrees. He tried to dismiss it, attributing it to the cool night air, but there was something undeniably eerie about the encounter. The woman didn't speak much at first. She just sat there, staring straight ahead, her hands folded quietly in her lap. John glanced over at her, wondering about her story. "Where are you headed?" he asked, attempting to break the silence. "My home," she replied, her voice still soft, but with a strange edge. "It's not too far from here. I'll tell you when we get closer." John nodded, though he couldn't help but feel a slight unease creeping in. Her mannerisms were odd. There was something unsettling about her calmness, about how she spoke so quietly, almost as if she was somewhere far away in her mind. As they continued down the empty highway, John tried to make conversation, asking her where she was coming from and if she had been traveling long. She answered with brief, almost non-committal responses. The atmosphere inside the car grew heavier with each passing mile. It was as if the world outside had faded away entirely, and only the two of them existed in this suspended, surreal moment. The road stretched out endlessly before them, and John's sense of time seemed to warp. He kept glancing at the rearview mirror, where the empty road behind them seemed to stretch into nothingness. A strange sensation tugged at the back of his mind, feeling that something wasn't quite right, but he couldn't put his finger on it. "I'm sorry if I'm being rude," John finally said, breaking the silence. "I just find it strange to see someone out here at this hour. What's your name?" The woman looked over at him, her eyes glimmering faintly in the dim light of the dashboard. "Sarah," she replied. "Sarah Jameson." John nodded and smiled politely, but his thoughts were racing. It seemed odd to him that Sarah would be standing alone in the middle of nowhere, especially at this time of night. As he drove, he began to wonder how long she had been waiting and whether she had been stranded or if something more mysterious was at play. "You must have been waiting a long time," John remarked. "It's not the kind of place you'd expect to find anyone." Sarah didn't respond at first. Instead, she stared out the window, her face expressionless. After a long pause, she spoke again, but this time her voice was more distant. "Yes," she said, her words trailing off. "I've been waiting a long time for the right person to come by." The cryptic nature of her words unsettled John even more. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, trying to shake the feeling of dread that had begun to creep into his thoughts. He focused his attention back on the road, telling himself that it was just the isolation of the journey playing tricks on his mind. As they continued driving, Sarah gave him directions, telling him which turns to make. The further they drove, the more remote the area seemed to become. The trees lining the road grew thicker, and the faint glow of the town seemed like a distant memory. It was almost as if they had entered another world, a world of darkness and uncertainty, where only they existed. John glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was well past midnight. He was starting to wonder if Sarah's house was further than he had originally anticipated. But she seemed calm, even serene, as though she knew exactly where she was going. They traveled on in silence, with only the sound of the tires humming against the road. At some point, Sarah turned to him and said, "It's just up ahead, a little further." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the words sent a chill down John's spine. He had the nagging feeling that something was wrong, that something was about to happen, but he couldn't quite understand what it was. All he knew was that the night was growing darker, and the road ahead felt more like a path to the unknown. John's grip on the steering wheel tightened as the car pushed further into the desolate night. What had started as a simple act of kindness-giving, a hitchhiker a ride, was beginning to feel like the beginning of a far more unsettling journey. Part 2. The Eerie Silence. As they continued their journey down the narrow, isolated highway, John could feel an increasing sense of unease building within him. The night had deepened further, and the darkness outside seemed to press in closer, as if the world beyond the headlights had disappeared entirely. It was just the car, Sarah, and the endless road ahead. The silence in the car grew more pronounced with each passing mile, and John's attempts at small talk fell flat, with Sarah offering only vague, cryptic answers. "Are you sure your house is around here?" John asked again, breaking the silence. "I've been driving for a while now." Sarah nodded, but her response was distant, as if she were speaking from another time or place. "It's close," she murmured softly. "You'll know it when you see it." John felt an odd discomfort in her words. They were strange and unsettling, not like the usual directions someone would give. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the whole situation felt increasingly surreal. The night was growing colder, and the air inside the car seemed to carry a chill that didn't make sense for a typical autumn evening. As they neared another sharp bend in the road, Sarah glanced out the window, her eyes scanning the trees, the darkness, and the emptiness that stretched around them. John's gaze shifted to the rearview mirror, but the road behind them was empty, no signs of other cars. No lights, just the black void of the night. "How long have you been out here?" John asked again, trying to fill the silence with something, anything, to distract himself from the growing tension. It must have been difficult waiting out here alone. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She sat still, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her head slightly turned away from him. After a long, uncomfortable pause, she finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "Longer than you think," she whispered, almost as if she were talking to herself. "Much longer than you think." John furrowed his brow. There was something so unsettling in the way she said it, so detached, so cold. Her voice was flat, and her words seemed to carry an unspoken meaning that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He wanted to ask more questions, to find out more about her, but something told him it wasn't a good idea. The air in the car seemed to thicken, and his mind raced with thoughts of what might be going on. Was she really stranded, or was there something else at play here? "Okay," John said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Do you live alone? You mentioned your house." Sarah nodded slowly, but the way she moved was unnervingly slow, deliberate, like she wasn't really present. "Yes," she said. "It's quiet. Very quiet." Another shiver ran down John's spine. He glanced at her again. Her face remained expressionless, but her eyes seemed distant, unfocused, staring at something beyond the window, something invisible to John. He couldn't help but feel like she wasn't really with him in the car, that she was somewhere else, perhaps even in another time. They drove for what felt like an eternity in silence until Sarah finally spoke again. "It's just up ahead," she said, her voice breaking the stillness like a whisper from a dream. "Take the next right turn." John's heart skipped a beat. The road they were on seemed endless, and the idea that they were nearing a destination after what felt like hours of driving seemed strange. The moment Sarah spoke, John was pulled from his thoughts and he focused on the road. He had been so lost in the tension that he hadn't even realized how long they had been driving. He didn't want to question her anymore. The words she said felt oddly final, as if she had been leading him to this very moment. Turning right onto a narrow, overgrown road, John's headlights illuminated the darkened path ahead. The trees grew denser here, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, casting eerie shapes along the ground. It was as if the trees were closing in around them, pushing the world outside of the car further away. The feeling of isolation grew stronger, and John's sense of unease only deepened. He had expected to see a house, maybe a porch light or a driveway, but there was nothing, just more darkness. "Are you sure this is the right road?" John asked cautiously, his voice tinged with concern. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She was staring straight ahead now, her face expressionless, as if she had already accepted something that John couldn't quite grasp. The air in the car had grown colder, and John felt the chill seep into his bones. Just then, Sarah spoke again, but this time her voice was even softer, almost a whisper. "It's just up ahead. You'll see it soon." John could feel his heartbeat quicken. He glanced around nervously, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. The trees seemed to press in closer, the night stretching endlessly before him. There was something about Sarah's demeanor, now something almost otherworldly, that made him question everything. Why had she chosen this road, this time, this moment? He continued driving, his eyes scanning the road ahead, but nothing seemed to change. It was as if the world around him had frozen in place, and there was no sign of the house Sarah had mentioned. The path seemed endless, the darkness unbroken. Finally, Sarah spoke once more. "This is where I get off," she said quietly. John's heart pounded in his chest. He could see nothing ahead but the endless stretch of road and the thick trees lining it. There was no house. There was nothing but the silence. His confusion turned to worry, and he looked over at Sarah, but she was already opening the door, as if she knew exactly where she was going. "Wait, where are you going?" John called, but it was too late. Sarah stepped out of the car without another word. She didn't look back, didn't even hesitate. John sat frozen in his seat, his mind racing. His instincts screamed at him to follow her, to stop her, but something held him back. Something told him that whatever was happening, whatever this was not something he was meant to understand. As Sarah disappeared into the night, John was left staring at the empty road, unable to make sense of what had just happened. Part 3. The Terrifying Revelation. John sat frozen in his car for a moment, his heart racing in his chest. The door to his car swung shut with a soft thud, and the sound echoed in the eerie silence of the night. The cold air seemed to rush back in, carrying with it an unsettling feeling that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He stared at the spot where Sarah had just been, but there was no sign of her. No trace of her footsteps in the dirt, no rustling leaves, nothing. He blinked in disbelief, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Had she really just gotten out of the car and walked off into the night? It felt as if the entire encounter had been a strange dream, a bizarre illusion that his mind had conjured up. But as he looked around the empty road, the empty trees, and the empty darkness, it was hard to shake the feeling that something very wrong had just occurred. A surge of panic bubbled up in his chest. He quickly started the engine and threw the car into reverse, his mind racing. He had to find her. He had to make sure she was okay. John hadn't even realized how much he had grown attached to the idea of helping her. The strange, unnerving nature of their encounter had taken hold of him, and now he felt compelled to see this through, to understand what was going on. But as he backed up the car and turned it around, he looked at the stretch of road ahead. It was the same desolate path he had driven down earlier, with no signs of any houses or even a place for Sarah to have gone. The trees loomed high on either side of him, their branches swaying gently in the wind, casting long shadows in the dim light of the headlights. John drove for several more minutes, hoping against hope that he'd spot Sarah somewhere on the road, walking, standing, anything, but there was nothing. The road remained empty, silent, and endless. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. He turned to look behind him, almost expecting to see Sarah sitting in the back seat, as though she had somehow reappeared, but the back seat was empty. The silence in the car felt suffocating, and his mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. Where had she gone? How had she disappeared so quickly? And what did she mean when she said, "It's just up ahead"? Unable to shake his growing sense of unease, John pulled over to the side of the road, his headlights casting an eerie glow over the surrounding trees. His breath quickened as he looked around. The silence was almost unbearable. He could hear nothing but the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. There was no sign of Sarah anywhere. Feeling as if he were being watched, John turned off the engine and stepped out of the car, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached the edge of the road. He looked down at the ground, hoping to see any trace of Sarah footprints, broken twigs, anything that would give him a clue as to where she had gone. But there was nothing. The ground was still and undisturbed, as though no one had ever walked there. John's stomach twisted with dread. His thoughts were racing as he realized the horrifying possibility that Sarah had never actually been there at all. But the conversation they had shared, the way she had looked at him, the faint chill in the car when she sat next to him, all of it felt so real. He had seen her, spoken to her, and yet now it was as though she had never existed. A cold gust of wind swept through the trees, and John shivered, his breath forming a mist in the air. His mind spun with confusion and fear, and it was at that moment that a thought struck him with terrifying clarity. What if Sarah had never been a person at all? Suddenly, the quiet was broken by a sound distant but unmistakable. It was the faint sound of tires crunching on gravel, growing louder with each passing second. John's head snapped around, his heart pounding. His breath caught in his throat as he saw something that made his blood run cold. Headlights, approaching fast from the direction he had just come. The car came into view, its headlights cutting through the darkness. It was an old, rusted vehicle, the kind that seemed to belong in another time. As it drew closer, John could see the outline of the drivera man, sitting alone in the car. But what caught John's attention was not the drivera, it was the passenger seat. There, sitting in the passenger seat, was Sarah. John's heart nearly stopped. He took a step back, his feet feeling as if they were frozen to the ground. The car slowed as it approached, and the figure in the passenger seat turned to look at him. But it wasn't Sarah, not entirely. It was a ghostly image of her pale face, her white dress, and her hollow eyes staring out from the darkness. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stared straight ahead as the car came to a stop right beside John. The driver, the man in the car, didn't even acknowledge John. He simply looked ahead, his face expressionless, as though he was blind to the world around him. John felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. His legs wobbled beneath him as he stumbled backward, unable to tear his eyes away from the apparition in the passenger seat. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the car vanished into thin air. John blinked, his pulse racing, his mind reeling from the absurdity of what he had just witnessed. The car had disappeared, along with Sarah's ghostly figure, leaving only the stillness of the night behind. He stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, unable to process what he had just seen. Had he imagined it? Was it some twisted figment of his imagination playing tricks on him in the dead of night? Or had he truly just witnessed something impossible, something that defied all logic and reason? All he knew was that the night had taken a turn into the unknown, and he was now part of a story he could never fully understand, a story that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The vanishing hitchhiker was no longer just a tale. It had become his reality. With trembling hands, John slowly turned back to his car, his heart pounding in his chest. But as he climbed into the driver's seat and closed the door, he caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror. And there, standing at the side of the road, was Sarah. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, staring at him with those lifeless eyes. John drove away as fast as he could, not daring to look back. But in the deep recesses of his mind, he knew one thing for certain. Some encounters are not meant to be explained. And some road sans travel dare never truly left behind. Let us proceed with the next story. There is a certain undeniable allure to abandoned places. They are monuments to decay, silent theaters where the final act was played out long ago. We are drawn to them because they are quiet and because they hold secrets. But there is a reason some places are abandoned. Sometimes it's not because people chose to leave. It's because the place itself or something within it decided it wanted to be left alone. Of all these forgotten locations, none hold a more potent mixture of sorrow and fear than an abandoned hospital. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Our story tonight is about a young man named Leo, an urban explorer who documented his adventures for a small but growing online audience. He was a thrill seeker, but he was also meticulous and respectful. He lived by the urban explorer's code: take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but footprints. He had explored abandoned schools, decaying factories, and forgotten theaters. But the one place he had always dreamed of, the holy grail for explorers in his region, was the old Mercy Falls Sanatorium. It was a place steeped in dark local legend. The sanatorium was built high in the misty rolling hills of West Virginia, a massive Gothic-style hospital originally intended for tuberculosis patients in the early 20th century. After the disease was largely cured, it was converted into a state-run asylum, a place where the mentally ill were sent to be forgotten. It was finally and abruptly shut down in the late 70s after a series of patient deaths and a state investigation that was sealed from the public. For decades since, it had been left to rot, a crumbling stone behemoth slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Leo planned his trip for weeks. He knew the risks. The building was structurally unsound, filled with asbestos and black mold. But the real danger, according to the whispers in town, was something else entirely. The locals spoke of the place as being deeply, fundamentally wrong. They said the suffering that had soaked into its stone walls had given birth to a malevolent echo. On a cold, overcast Saturday in October, Leo made his move. He drove his old pickup truck as far as he could up a barely there service road, then hiked the final 2 miles, his camera gear heavy on his back. When he finally saw it through the trees, he stopped, his breath catching in his chest. The sanatorium was even more imposing than in the pictures. It was a sprawling, multi-winged building of dark gray stone, its hundreds of windows like vacant, staring eyes. A profound, unnatural silence hung over the entire property. The usual sounds of the forest, the birds, the insects were gone. The only sound was the low, mournful sigh of the wind through the skeletal branches of the trees. He found an entry point through a broken window in the old kitchen. He slipped inside, and the temperature dropped by at least 20 degrees. The air was thick and heavy with the smell of decay, damp plaster, and a faint lingering scent of antiseptic that made the hairs on his arms stand up. For the first few hours, the exploration was exactly what he had hoped for. It was a photographer's dream of decay. He moved through the wards, his footsteps echoing in the vast empty spaces. He filmed rows of rusted iron bed frames, their mattresses long since rotted away. He found a children's ward with faded, peeling murals of cartoon animals on the walls and a single, solitary rocking horse standing in the middle of the floor. He explored the old operating theater, its massive overhead lamp hanging like a dead metallic eye over a stained operating table. The atmosphere was heavy with sadness, a palpable sense of the thousands of lonely lives that had been lived and ended within these walls. He felt a sense of unease, the constant prickling feeling of being watched, but he saw nothing out of the ordinary. He was a rational person. He knew that in a place like this, his mind would play tricks on him. It was in the late afternoon, as the light outside began to fade, that he found the sealed wing. At the far end of the third floor, a heavy set of double doors had been chained and padlocked from the outside. A rusted metal sign hung on the chains. It read, "Finch Wing, no admittance by order of State Medical Board." This was a mystery he couldn't resist. Using a pair of bolt cutters he had brought, he snapped the old rusted chain. The links fell to the floor with a loud clang that echoed through the silent hospital like a gunshot. He pushed the heavy doors open. The air that rushed out of the Finch Wing was different. It was colder, and it carried a strange, sterile, almost metallic smell. This wing was not like the others. It was not a ward for general patients. It was a series of small individual rooms, each with a heavy windowless door. And at the end of the long dark corridor was a single, larger office. The nameplate on the office door was still there, tarnished but legible. Dr. Alistair Finch, head of experimental therapies. Inside the office, a thick layer of dust covered everything. But underneath it, the room was a time capsule. Medical textbooks lined the walls. Strange, archaic-looking pieces of equipment sat on a workbench, and on the large mahogany desk, lying open as if its owner had just stepped out for a moment, was a leather-bound journal. Leo's heart was pounding. This was the kind of discovery explorers dream of. He carefully picked up the journal, its pages brittle with age. The handwriting inside was a precise, almost surgical script. It was the personal log of Dr. Finch. And as Leo began to read, he realized he had stumbled upon the dark secret at the heart of Mercy Falls. Dr. Finch was not a healer. He was a monster. He had been obsessed, not with curing his patients, but with the very moment of their passing. His journal was filled with chilling, pseudoscientific ramblings about what he called vital essence, the energy he believed was released from a human body in its final rattling breath. He believed this energy could be captured, studied, and perhaps even transferred. The Finch Wing was his private laboratory, and his terminally ill patients were his unwilling test subjects. The final entries were the most terrifying. Dr. Finch wrote of a new experiment, a device he had built to try and contain this vital essence. He described a procedure where he would bring a dying patient to his office, hook them up to his machine, and then help them along. His last entry was triumphant. He wrote, "Success. The collection vessel is now full. The resonance is beautiful. It is a chorus of final moments, a symphony of last breaths. The silence in this room is now the loudest thing I have ever heard." A sudden, intense cold swept through the office, so cold that Leo could see his own breath. He dropped the journal on the desk. He finally understood the feeling of wrongness in this place. It wasn't just haunted by sad, lingering ghosts. It was a prison, a container for something he couldn't possibly comprehend. And then, his camera, which had been sitting on the desk recording, suddenly powered down. The battery, which he knew had been fully charged, was completely dead. He fumbled in his bag for a spare. It was dead too. As was the one after that, a cold, technological dread washed over him. He decided it was time to leave. Now, he grabbed his gear and stepped out of the office into the dark corridor of the Finch Wing. The heavy double doors at the far end of the hall, the ones he had just opened, slammed shut with a deafening boom that shook the entire building. He was trapped. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He fumbled for his flashlight, its beam cutting a weak, trembling path through the oppressive darkness. He ran to the doors, pushing against them with all his might, but they wouldn't budge. It was as if they were being held shut by an immense, unseen force. And then he heard it. It started as a faint whisper, seeming to come from all the small, dark rooms around him at once. It was the sound of a dozen weak, rattling, final breaths, all exhaling at the same time. The sound grew louder, closer, and woven into it was a new sound. A man's voice, calm, cold, and clinical, whispering from the darkness right behind him. The subject appears agitated. Vital signs are elevated. Commencing observation. Leo screamed, a raw, terrified sound that was swallowed by the stone walls. He turned and ran blindly down the corridor away from the office, his only thought to find another way out. He fumbled with the doors to the small patient rooms, but they were all locked from the outside. He could feel the presence behind him, a wave of absolute cold that seemed to suck the very air from his lungs. He could hear the soft, dry shuffle of shoes on the dusty floor, keeping pace with him no matter how fast he ran. He finally found a door at the end of a side hallway, a supply closet. He burst inside, slammed the heavy wooden door shut, and wedged a fallen metal shelf under the handle. He collapsed to the floor in the pitch-black closet, his body shaking uncontrollably, trying to quiet his own ragged, panicked breathing. And then, from the other side of the door, he heard the voice of Dr. Finch, no longer a whisper, but a clear conversational tone, as if a doctor were speaking to a patient. "There is no need for fear," the voice said calmly. "We are simply here to observe your final moments. Your contribution to my research will be invaluable. Now please, breathe for me." The doorknob began to rattle violently. The metal shelf he had used as a barricade began to groan and bend. Leo knew he was going to die. But as he looked around the dark closet, in a final, desperate scan with his flashlight, he saw it. A small, grated ventilation shaft near the ceiling. It was his only chance. He scrambled up the shelves, his fingers tearing at the rusted grate. It finally came loose with a screech of metal. He squeezed his body into the narrow, dusty shaft, crawling on his hands and knees through a darkness filled with cobwebs and the scuttling of unseen things. Behind him, he heard the closet door crash open, followed by a long, frustrated sigh of cold, dead air. He crawled for what felt like an eternity, the rough metal tearing at his clothes and skin. He finally saw a faint glimmer of gray light ahead. He pushed at another grate, and it fell away, sending him tumbling out onto the floor of a different hallway on a different floor. He didn't wait to get his bearings. He scrambled to his feet and ran, following the faint light of the setting sun through the windows. He found a fire escape, its metal stairs rusted and treacherous, and climbed down, not stopping until his feet hit the solid, blessed ground outside. He ran through the dark, silent forest, not looking back, not stopping, until he reached his truck. He drove all night, not stopping until he was back in the bright, noisy, beautiful safety of the city. In the days that followed, he reviewed the footage from his cameras. Most of it, from the moment he entered the Finch wing, was corrupted, just a screen of hissing digital static. But he found one thing. On the audio track from his primary camera just before it died, if you turn the volume all the way up and filter out the noise, you can hear a faint whisper, a voice that wasn't his, a voice that wasn't there when he was filming. It's a cold, clinical voice, and it says just two words: new subject. Leo never went urban exploring again. He sold all his camera gear and moved to a different state. He learned that some places aren't just empty, they are waiting. And that the worst monsters aren't the ones that scream and chase you, they are the ones that watch and wait and want nothing more than to observe you in your final, terrifying moments. Let's talk about photographs for a moment. They are, in a way, a form of time travel, a captured moment, a ghost of light and shadow, frozen forever on a piece of paper. We use them to remember the happy times, the milestones, the faces of people we love. But every photo also has a secret. It only shows you what was inside the frame. It doesn't show you what was standing just outside of it. It doesn't show you what was watching from the trees or what was breathing quietly in the darkness just behind the person holding the camera. This is a story about a man who found a collection of old, forgotten photographs and in doing so, discovered a secret that should have stayed buried in the dark. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It's a powerful thought, all of us connected for a moment, sharing a story from our own quiet corners of the world. Drop it in the comments. Okay, our story tonight is about a photographer named Jake Riley. This all started on a bright, crisp Saturday in the autumn of 2013. Jake was a freelance photographer living in Denver, Colorado. He was a cynic by trade, a man who made his living capturing reality, not fantasy. He had a special love for old cameras and forgotten photographic processes. He spent his weekends scouring flea markets and dusty antique stores, searching for lost treasures. On this particular Saturday, at a sprawling outdoor market, he found something special. It was a small, leather-covered trunk the kind people used for travel in the 1950s. Inside, nestled amongst some old clothes, was a vintage Kodak Brownie camera, and next to it, a small rusted tin box. The box was heavy. Jake opened it. It was filled with over a dozen rolls of undeveloped 120 film. To a photographer like Jake, this was like finding a pirate's treasure chest. It was a collection of lost memories, a whole life story waiting to be revealed after more than half a century spent in darkness. He bought the trunk for $50 and rushed back to his small apartment, which doubled as his darkroom. He was an expert in handling old, fragile film. He spent the rest of the weekend carefully, painstakingly developing the rolls, his excitement growing with each one. As the first images began to appear, emerging like ghosts in the shallow, chemical-filled trays, a story began to unfold. The photos were a perfect slice of Americana from the late 1950s. They documented a classic family road trip. There was a father, a kind-looking man with glasses and a friendly smile, a mother with a classic, perfectly coiffed hairstyle, and two children, a boy of about 10 and a girl of about 7. They were driving a beautiful two-tone Chevrolet Bel Air. The photos were full of joy and nostalgia. There were shots of the family posing in front of the Grand Canyon, their faces beaming, pictures of them eating ice cream at a roadside diner, a photo of the kids laughing in the backseat of the car. It was a happy, ordinary family on a happy, ordinary vacation. Jake felt a sense of warmth as he hung the prints up to dry. He felt like he was getting to know this family from the past. He decided to call them the Martins, just to give them a name. It was on the 5th roll of film that Jake saw the first anomaly. The photo was of the Martin family having a picnic on a grassy overlook, probably somewhere in Utah, judging by the red rock formations in the background. It was a lovely, candid shot. But as Jake was examining the print under his magnifying glass, he noticed something in the trees at the far edge of the frame. It was a shape. It was tall and very thin and dark. It was too far away and slightly out of focus to make out any details, but it was undeniably the figure of a person, standing half hidden behind a pine tree, watching the family. Jake just assumed it was another tourist who had accidentally wandered into the shot. But then he developed the 6th roll. This series of photos was taken at a gas station in the middle of a vast empty desert. In one photo, as Mr. Martin is filling the car with gas, you can see the same figure again. It's standing across the highway, a quarter of a mile away, a tall, thin, black shape against the shimmering heat of the asphalt. Still too far away to see details, but its posture was strange. Its limbs seemed too long. A small, cold knot of unease began to form in Jake's stomach. This was no longer a coincidence. He developed the 7th and 8th rolls. The photos were from a motel, the kind with the little individual cabins. The Martin family looked tired, but still happy. And in the background of a photo of the kids playing by the motel pool, the figure was there again. This time, it was closer. It was standing at the far end of the parking lot, partially obscured by another car. It was still out of focus, a blurry silhouette, but Jake could now make out that it was wearing what looked like a dark, old-fashioned suit. And it was unnaturally tall. It had to be well over 6.5 feet. Jake's fascination was now turning into a creeping dread. He was no longer just a photographer developing old pictures. He was a witness to a slow, silent, and terrifying stalking. The family in the photos seemed completely oblivious. They were always smiling, always looking at the camera, never at the silent observer that was drawing closer with every picture. He developed the final rolls of film from the tin box. The 10th and 11th rolls were taken inside. The mood of the photos had changed dramatically. The family was no longer smiling. They were in another motel room, but this one looked dingy, cheap. The curtains were drawn. The father was on the phone, his face etched with worry. The mother was holding the two children close to her on the bed. They all looked terrified. In one photo, the little girl is pointing towards the window, her eyes wide with fear. And through a small gap in the curtains of the motel room window, you can see it. The figure is standing right outside, just a few feet away. Its face is still a blurry, indistinct smudge of shadow, but its form is clear. It is impossibly tall and thin, its long arms hanging limply at its sides. The very last photo on the very last roll was different. The quality was terrible. It was dark, blurry, and taken from a low angle, as if the camera had been hidden. It was taken from inside a dark space, looking out through what appeared to be the horizontal slats of a closet door. The photo showed the inside of the motel room. The door to the room was open. And standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the outside world, was the figure. It was inside. Its long, spindly frame barely fit through the door. Its features were still a swirling vortex of shadow, but you could feel its presence, a palpable aura of ancient, patient malice. And that was it. That was the last picture. The story just stopped. Jake felt physically ill. He had just witnessed the final, terrifying moments of a family he had come to know. He had to find out what happened to them. He was a man obsessed. He went back over the photos, looking for clues. A license plate on the Bel Air, a calendar in one of the motel rooms, dated August 1958, a road sign for a small town in Nevada. Using these clues and spending weeks in public records, archives, and online newspaper databases, he finally found them. Their real name was the Richardson family. And the records confirmed his worst fears. The Richardson family, father, mother, and 2 children, had vanished without a trace during a cross-country road trip in August of 1958. Their car was found abandoned at a motel in rural Nevada. The authorities at the time suspected the father had run off with the family, but no evidence was ever found. The case went cold, and they were eventually declared dead. Jake now had the horrifying answer. He knew what had happened to them. But his discovery brought him no peace. It brought him only a deeper, more personal terror. He started having nightmares. He would dream he was in the back of the Richardsons' car, and when he looked in the rearview mirror, the tall man in the suit was sitting in the seat next to him. He started feeling like he was being watched. He'd catch a glimpse of a tall, thin shadow at the end of his street, only for it to be gone when he looked again. The climax came one night when he was working late in his darkroom. He had been making enlargements of the final, terrifying photo, trying to resolve any detail in the figure's face. As he was looking at the image, submerged in the developer fluid, he saw something that made his heart stop. In the swirling, indistinct shadow of the creature's face, he could almost make out 2 tiny, faint pinpricks of light, like distant, watching eyes. And then he heard a sound from the other side of his apartment. A soft, slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap on his living room window. He stumbled out of the darkroom, his mind screaming. He stood in the hallway staring at his own front window. The blinds were closed. The tapping came again, a little louder this time. He knew, with a certainty that threatened to shatter his sanity, who was out there. He finally understood the true horror of what he had found. The entity, the thing he had started calling the Observer, didn't just stalk the Richardsons. It was tied to the act of being observed itself. It was drawn to the camera, to the images. For 50 years, it had been dormant, trapped inside those undeveloped rolls of film, its last hunt frozen in time. By developing the photos, by looking at them, Jake had opened a door. He had become the new observer, and in doing so, he had made himself the new target. The creature had found a new family to watch. The story of what happened to Jake Riley doesn't have a clear ending. His friends say he became a recluse, that he boarded up all the windows in his apartment, he sold all of his camera equipment. He was a photographer who became terrified of his own art. He eventually moved away, leaving no forwarding address. It makes you think. How many other lost stories are out there, sitting in undeveloped rolls of film in dusty boxes in antique stores all over the world? And it leaves us with one final chilling question. If you were to find one of these lost histories, and you had the power to bring it to the light, would you? Or would you be wise enough to know that some things, and some things that watch, are better left in the dark? Let us proceed with the next story. There is a unique and profound courage required to explore the deep sea. It is the last true frontier on our own planet, a world of absolute blackness, crushing pressure, and secrets that are billions of years old. We send our bravest and our brightest down into that abyss, into a place more alien than the surface of the moon. They go in search of knowledge, of discovery. But the deep does not give up its secrets easily. And sometimes, when we knock on the door of that ancient darkness, something answers back in a way we were never meant to understand. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Our story tonight is about one of these missions and about the final, terrifying message it sent back to a world it would never see again. This is the story of the research submersible Hades in its final dive into the Hecate Trench. The mission was the culmination of a decade of research, centered on a newly discovered anomaly deep in the Pacific Ocean. It was a trench, even deeper than the Mariana, but its existence defied all known geological models. It was a scar on the seabed that shouldn't have been there. Leading the expedition was Dr. Seabed%. R.S. Thorne, a brilliant, obsessive oceanographer who had staked his entire career on this dive. Piloting the Hades was Eva Rostova, a former Navy submersible pilot, a woman with nerves of steel and an unshakable professional calm. Rounding out the three-person crew was Ben Carter, a young, gifted systems engineer responsible for the sub's complex array of sensors and communication equipment. The Hades itself was a marvel of technology, a titanium sphere designed to withstand pressures that could turn a tank into a tin can. On a calm, gray morning, it was released from its mother ship and began its long, slow descent, a journey that would take over 7 hours. For the first few hours, the mood inside the cramped cockpit was one of professional excitement. They passed through the sunlit twilight zone, watching as strange, bioluminescent creatures drifted past their viewports like ghosts. Then they sank deeper, into the true abyss, a world of absolute, perfect blackness, where the only light was the powerful, sterile beams of the submersible itself. The only sound was the gentle hum of the life support systems and the calm, procedural chatter of the crew. It was at a depth of 6 miles that the first sign of trouble appeared. Ben, his eyes glued to his sensor displays, frowned. "Eva, Aris, you need to see this," he said, his voice a little tight. On the main sonar screen, a shape had appeared. It was massive, and its geometry was all wrong. It wasn't the jagged, chaotic shape of a natural rock formation. It was a collection of perfect straight lines and impossible angles. Before they could get a lock on it, it vanished from the screen, leaving behind only a trail of hissing, static. "A sensor ghost?" Eva asked, her voice steady, though she kept her eyes on the sonar. "I don't think so," Ben replied. "The system is clean. It was there." Dr. Thorne leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with an almost manic intensity. "It's the source," he whispered. "We're close." They continued their descent. An hour later, they reached the bottom of the Hecate Trench, nearly 7 miles below the surface of the ocean. And what they saw silenced them completely. Their powerful lights cut through the blackness, illuminating a scene that did not belong on planet Earth. The floor of the trench was not made of rock or silt. It was a vast, perfectly flat plain, made of a strange black crystalline material that did not reflect their lights, but seemed to swallow them. And rising from the center of this plain was a structure. It was a sprawling, non-Euclidean city of silent, black spires and towers that seemed to twist and fold in on themselves in ways that made the human eye ache. It was ancient, alien, and it was utterly impossible. "My God," Ben breathed, his hands hovering over his keyboard. "It's not a geological formation," Eva stated, her voice a flat, factual report, though a deep unease had settled in her tone. "It's artificial." Dr. Thorne was a man transfixed. "It's older than the trench itself," he said, his voice full of awe. "It's older than the ocean. It was here first." As they drifted in silent wonder, a new sensation began to fill the cockpit. It was a low, sub-audible hum, a vibration that they could feel in their teeth and in the very bones of the submersible. Ben's instruments confirmed it. A powerful, low-frequency signal was emanating from the center of the silent city. And then, their perfect mission began to fall apart. The lights in the cockpit flickered, the life support system, which had been humming steadily for hours, sputtered and coughed. "I'm getting massive EM interference," Ben said, his fingers flying across his console. "It's the signal. It's not just a sound. It's It's actively trying to interface with our systems. Get us out of here, Eva, Thorne commanded, his scientific curiosity suddenly replaced by a primal fear. On it, Eva replied, her hands moving to the controls. Ascent sequence initiated. But the Hades did not move. The thrusters whined, but the submersible remained fixed in place, as if held by an unseen hand. The hum from the city grew louder, and the sound began to change. It was no longer just a single, low tone. It was becoming a chorus of whispers, 1,000 voices speaking all at once, just below the threshold of comprehension. "I'm losing primary power!" Ben shouted. The main lights in the cockpit died, replaced by the dim red glow of the emergency backup system. The whispers grew clearer. They weren't just random sounds. They were words. But they were jumbled, chaotic. It was a collage of sound, echoes of radio broadcasts from the surface world, all mixed together. They could hear fragments of old news reports, a line from a forgotten pop song, a child's laugh, a snippet of a military transmission. It was as if this thing, this ancient silent city, had been a passive antenna for a century, listening to every stray signal humanity had ever broadcast into the ether. And now it was playing them all back at once. "It's a trap," Eva whispered, her eyes wide with a horror that had finally broken through her professional calm. "It uses our own sounds as a lure." Dr. Thorne was no longer speaking. He was just staring out the main viewport, a strange, serene smile on his face, as if he were listening to a beautiful symphony. And then, with a final violent surge of energy, everything went dead. The emergency lights, the life support, the last of Ben's consoles, everything. They were now trapped in a cold, silent titanium coffin 7 miles below the surface of the sea. The final transmission from the Hades was recorded on a separate battery-powered emergency channel, a last desperate message in a bottle. It is the voice of Eva Rostova, calm but stripped of all hope. The recording is filled with a strange, whispering static. "This is pilot Eva Rostova of the submersible Hades." Her voice begins, clear but distant. "Mission time is irrelevant. We are disabled at the bottom of the Hecate Trench. All primary and backup systems are offline. Life support has failed." There is a long pause, filled only with the strange whispering sound. Dr. Thorne is unresponsive. He is looking out the viewport. He is smiling. Systems engineer Ben Carter is gone. His seat is empty. I did not see him leave. The whispers are inside the sub now. Another pause. Her breathing is audible, ragged. There is something outside the main viewport. It's not a creature. It's a reflection. But the reflection is wrong. In the reflection, the inside of this cockpit is not new. It is ancient, dark, covered in some kind of growth. And sitting in our seats, and our seats are 3 shapes. They are dark, and they are still, and they are watching me. Her voice breaks for the first time, a single, choked sob. "It's not a city, it's a lens, or a mirror. It doesn't kill you, it changes you. It tunes you to its own silence. We are not the first. Oh God, we are not the first." The recording ends with a final, clear sentence, her voice a desperate, urgent warning to a world she would never see again. "If you are receiving this, do not come looking for us. Do not answer the echo. You have to." Her voice is cut off by a single, sharp, resonant sound, like a silver bell being struck once, a sound that rings out and then fades into a perfect, absolute silence. A massive search and rescue operation was launched. They searched for weeks. They found no wreckage, no oil slick, no debris field. The submersible, Hades, and its 3-person crew had simply vanished from the face of the earth. It leaves you with a final, chilling thought. The deep sea is a place of echoes. But what if some of those echoes are not from the past? What if they are lures, sent out by something ancient and patient, something that is still down there in the crushing, absolute dark, just waiting for the next curious voice to answer its call? Now, we jump into another story. There's a powerful idea in our culture, the dream of owning a home, a place of your own, a sanctuary to raise a family, to make memories, to put down roots. We pour our hopes and our savings into these structures of wood and brick, but we're often not the first. Every house, especially an old one, has a history. It has layers. It has soaked up the joys, the sorrows, and the secrets of the lives lived within its walls. Most of the time, those are just quiet ghosts of memory. But this story is about a family who bought their dream home for a bargain, a foreclosed property in a quiet town. And in that house, they found a diary left by the previous owner. A diary that wasn't just a record of a life, but a set of instructions for surviving what lived inside the walls with him. And by the time they understood what they were reading, it was already too late. This is the story of the Miller family, Tom, Sarah, and their 10-year-old daughter, Chloe. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? Our story begins in the spring of 2014. The Millers were at a turning point. Tom was a contractor who had just landed a stable new job. Sarah was a freelance graphic artist who could work from anywhere. They decided it was time to leave the cramped suburbs of Boston for a quieter, slower life. They found their dream on a real estate website, a beautiful two-story Victorian house on a few acres of land in a small rural town in Maine. The house was magnificent, with a charming wraparound porch, a turreted roof, and large, beautiful windows. It needed a lot of work, the paint was peeling, the garden was overgrown, but it had what the real estate agents call good bones. And the price was unbelievable. It was a foreclosure. The bank had repossessed it after the previous owner, an elderly man, had passed away with no heirs. For Tom and Sarah, it felt like winning the lottery. They moved in on a bright, sunny day in May. The house was even better in person, but there was a certain melancholy that clung to the place. The air inside was still and heavy with the feeling of abandonment. And they noticed the neighbors were reserved, polite, but they wouldn't make eye contact for long, and they were reluctant to talk about the previous owner, a man they only referred to as Mr. Barrow. Tom, being a contractor, was excited to get to work. He started with the master bedroom, which had some significant water damage in the closet. As he was tearing out a section of damp drywall, his crowbar hit something solid. It wasn't a stud or a pipe. Behind the wall was a small hidden cavity, and nestled inside was a small leather-bound journal. It was old, the cover worn smooth with time, but it was in perfect condition. It wasn't locked. That evening, after Chloe was asleep, Sarah, whose curiosity always outweighed her caution, sat down in the living room with a cup of tea and opened the journal. The handwriting inside was elegant, precise cursive, written in fountain pen ink. It was, as they had guessed, the diary of the previous owner, Joseph Barrow. The first dozen entries were exactly what she expected. They were dated from 5 years prior. Joseph wrote about his quiet life with his wife, Mary. He wrote about his love for the house, his passion for his garden, his daily routines. He seemed like a gentle, loving man. The only slightly odd thing was the way he wrote about the house itself. He didn't refer to it as the house or my home. He called it by a name, the foundation, and he often wrote about it as if it were a living, breathing entity. An entry from his first week read, "The foundation is settling in around us. Mary says it's drafty, but I believe it is merely breathing. It seems content to have life within its walls again." Sarah read a few entries to Tom, who just shrugged. Old guy was probably just a bit eccentric. He said, "Every old house gets a nickname." They thought nothing more of it and put the diary on their nightstand. Over the next few weeks, life was good. Tom made progress on the renovations. Chloe loved her new big yard. But Sarah kept reading the diary, and she began to notice a slow, creeping change in the tone of Joseph's writing. About a year into his entries, Joseph wrote that his wife Mary had fallen ill. It was a strange, wasting sickness that the doctors couldn't diagnose. She was always cold, always tired, and she began to refuse to leave her bedroom. And Joseph's writing about the house began to shift from affectionate to fearful. An entry read, "Mary is weaker today. The chill in her bones will not leave. I believe the foundation is the cause. It has grown jealous of my love for her. It wants me for itself. I hear it groaning in the night, a hungry sound that comes up from the cellar. I mind." This is where the story takes a turn from a sad tale of an old man's grief to something far more sinister. Joseph began to document a strange and specific set of rules. He believed they were a way to appease the house, to keep its malevolent energy at bay. The rules were bizarre. Rule 1, the cellar door must never be left open after sundown. The cold from the foundation rises at night. Rule 2, the foundation dislikes the color yellow. It is a garish, happy color that offends its quiet nature. Rule 3, all mirrors must be covered before sleep. The foundation enjoys watching, and it is not good to be seen in the dark. The list went on, a dozen rules, each one more paranoid than the last. Sarah read these passages with a growing sense of unease. She told herself it was just the tragic diary of a man losing his mind as his wife was dying. But then, small, unexplainable things started to happen in the Millers' new home. Chloe was the first to show a change. She was a happy, outgoing child, but she became quiet and withdrawn. She started spending hours in her room, whispering to someone who wasn't there. When Sarah asked who she was talking to, Chloe would reply with a smile, "Mr. Joe? He's my new friend. He lives in the walls, and he tells me the secrets of the house." Then, things that mirrored the diary began to occur. Tom and Sarah would wake up in the morning and find the cellar door, which they were certain they had locked, standing wide open, a wave of unnatural cold seeping into the kitchen. One day, Sarah bought a beautiful bouquet of yellow daffodils and put them in a vase on the dining room table. The next morning, every single flower was wilted and black, as if they had been dead for a week. The other flowers in the house were fine. Sarah, her nerves frayed, found herself subconsciously starting to follow Joseph's rules. She double-checked the cellar door lock before bed. She threw out the dead daffodils and made a mental note not to buy yellow ones again. She even started covering the mirror in their bedroom with a scarf. Tom noticed her strange new habits and grew concerned. He dismissed the occurrences as coincidences, blaming her anxiety on the stress of the move and the influence of the creepy diary. The first real tension began to grow between them. Sarah felt like she was going crazy, and Tom's skepticism made her feel utterly alone. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Sarah read to the end of the diary. The final entries were written in a frantic, almost illegible scrawl. Joseph wrote that his wife, Mary, had finally passed away in her sleep. He didn't blame the illness, he blamed the house. He wrote that the house had consumed her warmth and was now stronger than ever. He wrote that it wouldn't let him leave, that every time he tried to pack his bags, a sudden violent accident would happen, a falling piece of plaster, a shattered window preventing his escape. The very last entry in the diary was the most terrifying of all. It was just a few sentences, written with a shaky hand. "Mary is gone, but the foundation is not satisfied. It requires a family to sustain it. It needs to be fed by the warmth of life. I cannot let it take another. If I cannot leave it, then I will join it. I will become its keeper. I will merge with its bones. My hunger will be its hunger, and I will keep the next family safe, so long as they follow the rules." Sarah dropped the diary as if it were on fire. She finally understood. Joseph Barrow hadn't just died of old age. He had done something to himself, some kind of dark ritual to merge with the house, believing he could contain the entity within it. The presence Chloe was talking to, Mr. Joe, wasn't a harmless imaginary friend. It was the twisted, hungry remnant of Joseph, now a permanent conscious part of the house itself. That very night, their nightmare truly began. Around 2 a.m., Sarah woke up to a strange noise. It was a faint, rhythmic scratching sound coming from inside the wall, right next to their bed. It was the same sound Joseph had described in his diary. She woke Tom, and he heard it too. It was real. As they both sat there, frozen in fear, the scratching stopped. And then, a low, masculine voice whispered from inside the wall, clear as day. It whispered one word: hungry. They grabbed Chloe from her room and spent the rest of the night huddled together in the living room, terrified. The next day, Tom, his skepticism finally shattered, agreed they had to leave. They booked a hotel and started frantically packing their most important belongings. That evening, as they were about to make their last trip out to the car, they realized Chloe was missing. She wasn't in the house, she wasn't in the yard. Panic set in. Sarah's mind raced back to the diary, to Joseph's obsession with the cellar. She knew, with a certainty, that chilled her to the bone where her daughter was. They ran to the cellar door in the kitchen. It was closed. But when Tom tried the handle, it wouldn't budge. It was as if it were sealed shut by an immense, unseen pressure. He threw his shoulder against it, but it was like hitting a wall of solid rock. And then they heard Chloe's voice from the other side of the door. But it was a strange, flat, monotone voice, devoid of all emotion. She was speaking to someone. "Yes, Mr. Joe," she said calmly. "I understand. A family must always live here. We have to feed the house." From all around them, from the very walls of the kitchen, a low, whispering voice echoed, the same voice they'd heard in their bedroom. It was the voice of Joseph Barrow. "You cannot have her," the house whispered. "She belongs to the foundation now. The house must be fed." The entire house groaned around them, a sound like a great beast waking from a slumber. Tom, in a desperate rage, threw his entire body against the cellar door again and again. In that moment of pure terror, Sarah's mind had a flash of clarity. She remembered the one thing the diary had said the house hated. The color yellow? It was a long shot, a desperate gamble based on a dead man's insane ramblings. But it was all she had. In the living room, among the boxes, was a can of bright canary yellow paint they had bought for Chloe's room. "Keep him busy!" she screamed at Tom. While Tom continued to pound on the door, drawing the house's malevolent attention, Sarah ran, grabbed the can and a paintbrush, and pried the lid open with shaking hands. She ran back to the cellar door and began to frantically slap the thick, bright yellow paint all over the wood. The reaction was immediate and violent. A low, guttural moan of what sounded like pure agony echoed through the entire structure. The whispering voice of Joseph screamed, a sound of rage and pain that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. The pressure on the door vanished. Tom turned the handle and it swung open easily into the darkness below. He and Sarah scrambled down the steps and found Chloe standing at the bottom, in the center of the cold earthen floor, staring at a damp, crumbling section of the stone wall. She was dazed, as if waking from a dream. They didn't wait. They each grabbed one of her hands and fled. They ran out of the house, got in their car, and drove away without looking back, leaving all their belongings and their dream home behind them. The Miller family moved to a small, modern apartment in another state and began the slow process of healing. The house in Maine, once again, sits empty, the bank having foreclosed on it for a second time. But the story doesn't quite end there. The local police have been called to the property a few times by neighbors reporting lights turning on and off in the empty house. Teenagers, on a dare, have snuck onto the porch. They say that if you press your ear against the old walls of the house, you can still hear a man's voice whispering inside. He's still whispering his rules, preparing the house for its next family. But he's added a new one to his list, a rule he learned the hard way, whispered over and over again into the darkness: no yellow. The foundation hates yellow. The Millers didn't destroy the entity, they just gave it a new piece of information. The trap is now smarter, it's more patient, and it's waiting. Waiting for the next family to come looking for their dream home. Let's talk about solitude. Real, true solitude. In our modern, noisy world, it's something many of us crave a chance to disconnect, to hear our own thoughts. But there's a difference between choosing solitude for a weekend and having it as your constant, unending companion. There are jobs, even today, that demand this kind of isolation. One of the most noble and perhaps loneliest is that of a fire lookout. They are sentinels watching over vast, silent empires of trees from a glass box perched on a mountaintop. They are our first line of defense against the flames. But the wild places of this world have older things to fear than fire. And sometimes watching over the wilderness means you become the subject of its own unseen watch. On that note, as this story travels through the airwaves to find you, I'm always curious where it lands. So tell me, where are you all listening from? What city, what town? It's a powerful thought, all of us sharing a moment of quiet dread from our own corners of the world. Okay, our story tonight is about a young man who took one of these jobs seeking peace. But what he found instead was a tattered, handwritten notebook of rules and the terrifying truth behind why they had to be followed. This is the story of the Thor's Peak Fire Lookout. Our story begins in the summer of 2008 with a young man named Alex. He was 21, a college student who felt like his life was spiraling. A bad breakup had left him reeling, and the constant noise and pressure of city life felt suffocating. He saw a job posting online from the U.S. Forest Service, Summer Fire Lookout, Arapahoe National Forest, Colorado. It seemed like the perfect antidote, a summer of solitude, majestic views, and a chance to reset his own internal compass. He applied, and to his surprise, he got the job. The Thor's Peak Lookout was one of the most remote in the state. Getting there involved a 2-hour drive from the nearest town, followed by a 5-mile hike up a steep trail. The tower itself was a relic from another era. A 100-foot-tall steel structure, skeletal and stark against the blue mountain sky. At the very top was a single 14 by 14-foot room with glass windows on all 4 sides, offering a breathtaking, godlike view of millions of acres of pine and aspen forest. This tiny glass box would be Alex's entire world for the next 3 months. His first week was a training period with the man he was replacing, a leathery old-timer named Frank. Frank was a man of few words, with eyes that seemed to be permanently squinting at a distant horizon. He taught Alex the practicalities of the job, how to use the Osborne Firefinder, how to read weather patterns, how to operate the crackly radio for the twice-daily check-ins. He was competent, professional, but Alex noticed a deep, unshakable weariness in the man, a haunted look in his eyes that went beyond simple fatigue. On Frank's last day, as he was packing his gear to hike down for the final time, he handed Alex 2 books. The first was the thick official Forest Service manual. "This book tells you how to spot smoke," Frank said, his voice a low gravel. He then pushed a second, much smaller notebook across the table. It was a simple spiral notebook, its cover soft and frayed, its pages filled with decades of different handwriting. "This book," Frank said, making eye contact with Alex for the first time with a startling intensity, "tells you how to survive the nights." And with that cryptic warning, he was gone. That evening, as the sun set in a spectacular blaze of orange and purple, Alex sat down and opened the handwritten notebook. The first page had "The Rules for Thor's Peak" written in block letters. The rules were bizarre, and they sent a small, unexpected shiver down his spine. 1. After the sun has fully set, do not look directly at any of the other distant peaks for more than a few seconds. They are not all empty. You don't want them to know you're watching. 2. If you hear a sharp, pecking tap on the window glass at night, do not turn on your lantern. It is not a bird. 3. The radio will sometimes pick up a broadcast of a woman singing opera, usually between 2 and 3 a.m. Turn it off immediately. Do not let the music finish. 4. If you hear a voice calling for help or calling your name from the base of the tower at night, you must not answer it. No matter what you hear, you do not answer. 5. Before you sleep, close the blinds on the north-facing window. The one that looks towards the valley, they call the Ashen Kettle. Some things are shy. Alex closed the notebook, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. It had to be a prank, a kind of rookie hazing ritual, a collection of superstitions passed down by lookouts who had spent too much time alone. He was a rational, modern person. He believed in what he could see and measure. He dismissed the rules as the ramblings of lonely men and settled in to enjoy his majestic solitude. This was a mistake. The first 10 days were idyllic. Alex felt his city-born anxieties melting away in the profound silence and clean mountain air. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He completely forgot about the notebook and its strange rules. On the 11th night, he was sitting at his desk, watching a meteor shower arc across the impossibly clear, star-dusted sky. He let his gaze drift across the horizon, a jagged silhouette of distant mountain peaks. He remembered the first rule, then do not look directly at the other peaks, and scoffed. He deliberately focused his gaze on the highest, most distant peak on the horizon. For a long time, there was nothing but the dark shape of the mountain against the stars. But then, a tiny pinprick of orange light appeared on the peak, like a single distant campfire. As he watched, another light blinked into existence next to it, then another and another. Within a minute, dozens of these lights were flickering all across the distant peak. They weren't twinkling like stars, and they weren't steady like campfires. They were appearing and disappearing in a strange, synchronized, silent rhythm. It looked less like a campsite and more like a massive watching audience. A primal fear, cold and sharp, shot through him. He felt with absolute certainty that he was being observed. He ripped his gaze away, his heart pounding, and spent the rest of the night with his back to that window. A few nights later, the second rule was put to the test. A thick, wet fog rolled in, blanketing the entire world in a silent, gray nothingness. It was claustrophobic, the view from his glass box reduced to just a few feet. Around midnight, he heard a sharp, insistent tap, tap, tap on the eastern window pane. It sounded exactly like a bird's beak, perhaps a woodpecker confused by the fog. His first instinct was to flip on his battery-powered lantern to shoo it away. But Frank's warning echoed in his mind. It is not a bird. The tapping became more methodical. It moved from the east window to the south window. Tap, tap, tap. Then to the west. Tap, tap, tap. It was circling him. It was testing the windows of his cage, one by one. The sound was intelligent. Alex sat frozen in the center of the dark room for 3 hours, listening to the relentless, investigative tapping until it finally faded away with the first light of dawn. When he looked outside, the fog had cleared. There were no trees close enough for a bird to perch on. He was a believer now. The rules weren't a joke. They were a survival guide. He began to follow them with a religious devotion. He never looked at the peaks at night. He covered the north-facing window before he slept. He sat in darkness whenever the tapping started. And then came the radio. He was listening to the quiet static one night, waiting to make his scheduled 9 p.m. check-in, when the static was slowly replaced by music. It was an opera aria, a woman's soprano voice, filled with a sorrow so profound it was almost beautiful. The recording quality was ancient, full of hiss and crackle, as if it were being broadcast from 100 years ago. The music was hypnotic. Alex felt an overwhelming wave of melancholy wash over him. He felt his own recent heartbreak, his loneliness, magnified 1,000 times. He felt a deep, strange desire to just listen, to let the sad, beautiful music consume him. He almost forgot the rule, but some primal instinct screamed at him. He lunged for the radio and switched it off. The sudden silence was like a physical blow. He was left shaking, his heart pounding, feeling as though he had just narrowly pulled back from the edge of a great dark cliff. Terrified, Alex now pored over the handwritten notebook, searching for answers. He saw the entries from the lookouts before him, their handwriting styles changing every few years, stretching back into the 1960s. They all described the same things. An entry from 1992, the watchers were out on the ridge again tonight. So many lights. From 1981, the tapper was on the glass for hours. Sounds like it's getting angry. From 1974, heard the siren song on the radio again. Almost didn't turn it off this time. The final entries from Frank were the most chilling. He wrote about researching the history of the tower itself. He'd discovered that a lookout in the late 60s had gone mad, claiming a voice was calling to him from below, a voice only he could hear. That young man, Frank wrote, had vanished from the tower one morning. The door was locked from the inside. The only thing they found was his logbook, open to a blank page, and a single muddy footprint on the ceiling. Alex was now living in a state of managed terror. He did his job during the day, but the nights were a long, tense vigil. And then, at the height of summer, a massive thunderstorm rolled in, bringing the final, most important rule to the forefront. The wind howled like a freight train. The tower swayed sickeningly on its steel legs. Rain lashed against the glass, and lightning turned the world outside into a series of terrifying, overexposed photographs. In a brief lull between two deafening claps of thunder, Alex heard something else. It was a voice, drifting up from the base of the tower, 100 feet below. It was a woman's voice, laced with panic. "Hello, is anyone up there? Please help me. My husband fell. I think his leg is broken. We saw your tower. Please!" Alex's training, his duty, his every human instinct screamed at him to respond, to offer help. He scrambled to the trapdoor in the floor, his hand on the latch, but he remembered Rule 4. Never answer a voice that calls. He was torn. Was this a trick of the mountain? Or was he about to let someone die? As if sensing his hesitation, the voice changed. It became instantly, chillingly familiar. It was his mother's voice. Alex? Honey, what are you doing up there? It's so dangerous in this storm. Come down and let's go home. He froze, his blood turning to ice. His mother was in Arizona, 1,000 miles away. This was impossible. The voice changed again, shifting into a perfect imitation of his ex-girlfriend, the very reason he had taken this job. I'm so sorry, Alex, her voice pleaded. I was wrong. I drove all the way out here to find you. Please just come down so we can talk. He stumbled backwards from the trapdoor, his mind reeling. The thing below was in his head. It was using his memories, his love, his grief as a weapon. Then, the voice dropped all pretense. The mimicry ceased. It was replaced by a dry, ancient, guttural sound that seemed to rise up from the very rock of the mountain. It was a sibilant, hungry whisper that hissed his name over and over, no longer trying to trick him, but simply to terrorize him, letting him know it was there. The storm finally broke with the dawn. Alex was a shattered wreck. As soon as the sun was up, he got on the radio and called his supervisor. His voice was hoarse. He told them he was quitting, effective immediately. He didn't offer an explanation. He knew they wouldn't believe him. He packed his bag, scrambled down the 153 steps of the steel ladder without looking back, and all but ran the 5 miles down the trail to his truck. He never returned. Alex is back in the city now. He surrounds himself with the noise and the crowds, finding comfort in the lack of silence, but he is still haunted by what he experienced on Thor's Peak. The official report states that he was another young man who couldn't handle the profound isolation of the job. And the Forest Service website has a new posting up. They're looking for next summer's fire lookout for the Arapaho National Forest. It makes you wonder. When the next idealistic young person takes that job, seeking peace and quiet, will they be given the tattered, handwritten notebook? And when they find themselves alone in that glass box, suspended between the earth and the endless, watching sky, will they be wise enough to follow the rules when they hear a familiar voice calling their name from the darkness below? There was a man in rural Georgia named Carl Granger. Not the kind of name you'd remember at first glance. He lived alone on the edge of a small town called Hollow Creek, population under 3, 0, and shrinking every year. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, but no one really knows you. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Carl wasn't loud. He didn't draw attention to himself. He worked part-time as a mechanic, sometimes helped with trail maintenance in the national forest nearby, and always paid his bills on time. To the townsfolk, he was just another quiet man who kept to himself. A little odd, maybe, but harmless, or so they thought. The black pine forest stretched for miles behind his property. It was thick, dark even in daylight, and full of twisting trails that led nowhere and everywhere. Locals warned visitors not to go in after sundown. There were story-sold ones about people who wandered into those woods and never came back, but most dismissed them as folklore. Ghost tales told around campfires to scare kids from wandering too far. Then, the disappearances started. It began subtly. A hiker went missing one evening while exploring the old Ranger Trail. Then, a photographer vanished while trying to capture sunrise through the misty pines. A couple of teenagers disappeared after sneaking out late one night. One by one, they entered the forest and never returned. No bodies were found, no signs of struggle, just silence. And somehow, no one suspected Carl. Not at first. After all, he was always the one helping with search parties. He knew the terrain better than anyone. He'd volunteer to scout ahead, point out trails others had missed, and even help organize rescue teams. He was calm, helpful, too helpful. But deep inside the forest, hidden beneath layers of moss and fallen branches, something else was growing. Then came the storm. It hit in late autumn, tearing through the trees with wind that howled like something alive. Rain fell in sheets, soaking everything, turning the ground into mud. And when it finally passed, the forest looked different. Trees were uprooted, sections of earth had collapsed. One of those collapses revealed something buried beneath the roots of an ancient oak. What investigators found chilled them to the bone. Personal items, identification tags, clothing still clinging to bones that had been hidden for years. Some of them matched names from missing persons reports stretching back over a decade. They traced everything back to Carl. When police arrived at his home, they expected chaos, blood-stained floors, weapons, evidence of madness. But instead, they found everything eerily clean, organized, almost peaceful. His walls were lined with map-hand-drawn, detailed journals filled with notes, dates, descriptions. Each entry chronicled a disappearance, who they were, how he lured them in, where they were last seen, and how he made sure they never left. He didn't run when they came. He didn't resist. In fact, he smiled as he opened the door, like he was expecting them. During interrogation, Carl spoke calmly, almost proudly. He described himself as a kind of guardian and unseen protector of the forest. He believed these people, the lost, as he called them, weren't meant to live, that they had strayed too far from safety, from society, and that it was his duty to make sure they never wandered again. To many, he was a monster, a killer. But then, something strange happened. At his sentencing hearing, the judge considered his mental state, his lack of prior criminal record, and the way he showed no remorse note because he didn't understand what he did, but because he truly believed it was justified. The case was complicated. Public opinion was divided. Some called for life in prison. Others argued he should be studied, not punished. But the most shocking part? A few months later, Carl was transferred to a secure psychiatric facility where he received therapy and counseling. Then, during a public ceremony closed to the media but attended by high-ranking officials, she was given a medal, a recognition for aiding in the recovery of several missing persons' remains. Yes, a hero's medal for leading investigators to the bodies of the very people he killed. Even now, years later, the name Carl Granger is spoken in hushed tones in Hollow Creek. Parents warn their children not to go near Black Pine Forest, especially after sunset. And some say, on foggy nights, if you stand near the edge of the trees, you can hear footsteps, breathing, and maybe, just maybe, a soft whisper asking, "Are you lost?" Let me tell you about one of them, one of the lost. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 22, studying photography at a small liberal arts college in Tennessee. She had dreams of traveling the world, capturing moments that told stories without words. That summer, she decided to take a road trip through the southern states. Her goal? To photograph forgotten places, abandoned houses, ghost towns, overgrown trails, places where history lingered in silence. Black Pine Forest was on her list. She arrived in Hollow Creek a few days before she vanished, stayed at a small motel near the edge of town, talked to locals about the forest, its beauty, its mystery. They warned her not to go in alone. Some even offered to guide her. She refused. "I need to feel it for myself," she said. So she walked in. She posted a few photos on Instagram the next day, mist curling around ancient trunks, light filtering through the canopy, shadows dancing across the leaves, beautiful, eerie. Then, nothing. Her phone was never found. Her camera was never recovered. Only the photos remained. And then there was Detective Marcus Hale, lead investigator on the case, a man who had spent over 2 decades chasing down leads, solving cold cases, and putting away criminals. When Carl was arrested, Hale was the one who sat across from him during questioning. He watched Carl's eyes as he spoke, looking for cracks, for regret, for any sign that this man understood what he had done. But Carl only smiled. "You think I'm a killer," he said quietly, hands folded neatly on the table. "But I'm not. I'm a guide." "A guide?" Hale asked. "Yes, for those who are already lost." Hale leaned forward. "You took lives, Carl." Carl shook his head slowly. "I ended wanderings." The detective didn't respond right away. Something about the way Carl spoke unsettled him, not because it sounded insane, but because somewhere in there it almost made sense. After the trial, Hale visited the forest. Not officially, just him, a flashlight, and a notebook. He wanted to see for himself. As he walked deeper in, the air grew colder, the trees seemed taller, the silence heavier. And then, just as he reached the clearing where the bodies had been found, he heard it. A voice. Soft. Whispering. "Are you lost?" He turned quickly, heart pounding. Nothing was there. Just the trees, the wind, and the echo of a question that would follow him for the rest of his life. Now, let me tell you what happens when someone dares to enter the forest today. If you visit Hollow Creek, you'll find that the town has changed. Not much, just enough. A new gas station, a few more tourists. But the forest, it remains untouched, unforgiving. Some say Carl's influence lingers. Every once in a while, someone goes in, usually alone, usually curious, and sometimes they come back. But not quite the same. They talk about things they saw, things they heard. A man standing between the trees, watching, waiting. And if you ask them if they heard the whisper, they don't answer right away. Because they're afraid. Afraid that if they speak it aloud, it might call to them again. Are you lost? Next story is, she left one message before vanishing, never go to room 3. It all started with a simple message scrawled in black marker on the back of a hotel notepad. The note read, "Never go to room 3. No explanation, no signature, just those 5 chilling words left behind by a young woman named Emily Carter. Emily had arrived at the Maplewood Inn late one Friday evening after driving nonstop from Atlanta to Birmingham. She was tired but eager to explore the small town where her cousin lived. Her plan was straightforward: spend the night, rest up, and visit family the next day. But she never made it out of the inn. When Emily checked into the hotel, everything seemed normal. A quiet lobby, friendly staff, and a warm welcome from the desk clerk, Mr. Thompson, who greeted her with a smile. He handed her key card for room 14, explaining that it was on the 2nd floor near the elevators. "Let me know if you need anything," he said cheerfully as she signed the guest book. Emily thanked him politely and headed upstairs. She dragged her suitcase down the dimly lit hallway, humming softly to herself as she went. When she reached room 14, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. At first glance, the room looked ordinary. Double bed covered in a beige quilt, a small wooden desk with a lamp, and a television mounted on the wall. There was nothing unusual about it, or so she thought. That night, however, something strange happened. Around midnight, Emily woke suddenly to the sound of footsteps outside her door. At first, she assumed it was another guest returning late to their room, but then the steps stopped directly across the hall. Her curiosity piqued. Emily peeked through the peephole. What she saw chilled her to the bone. There, standing in front of room 3, was a figure cloaked entirely in shadow. Its outline was hazy, almost translucent, as though it didn't belong in this world. For several seconds or perhaps minutes, time felt distorted. It simply stood there, unmoving. Then, without warning, it disappeared. Shaken, Emily grabbed the hotel notepad from the desk and wrote down the cryptic warning, "Never go to room 3. She intended to show it to Mr. Blank Thompson in the morning, hoping he could explain what she'd witnessed. But when dawn came, Emily wasn't there. The next morning, Mr. Thompson noticed something odd during his routine check of occupied rooms. Room 14 showed no signs of movement. The curtains remained closed, and the door handle didn't budge when he tried turning it gently. Concerned, he used his master key to enter. Inside, he found the room exactly as Emily had left it the previous night. Her suitcase sat open on the bed, clothes still folded neatly inside. On the desk lay the notepad with its ominous message. But Emily herself was nowhere to be found. Alarmed, Mr. Thompson called the police immediately. Officers arrived within the hour, searching both the room and the surrounding area. They questioned other guests and staff members, but turned up empty-handed. No one had seen Emily leave the building, nor had anyone heard any unusual noises during the night. As the investigation unfolded, detectives discovered something peculiar. While Room 3 existed physically, it was located directly across from Room 14. It hadn't been rented out for over 20 years. In fact, according to hotel records, it had been permanently sealed off due to structural damage caused by a fire decades earlier. Yet, despite being inaccessible, the door to Room 3 bore faint scratch marks around its edges, as though someone or something had attempted to force it open recently. Confused and intrigued, Detective James Reed decided to investigate further. He brought in forensic experts to examine the area and even consulted paranormal researchers, though such measures were met with skepticism from his superiors. Meanwhile, rumors began spreading through the town. Some claimed Emily had run away, unable to cope with personal issues. Others whispered darker possibilities that she had fallen victim to something unnatural lurking within the walls of the Maplewood Inn. Weeks passed, then months. Despite extensive searches, neither Emily nor any evidence of foul play surfaced. Her disappearance became yet another unsolved mystery filed away in dusty archives. Or so everyone believed. Years later, a new employee joined the Maplewood Inn team. His name was Daniel Hayes, a recent college graduate looking for steady work while figuring out his career path. Young and ambitious, Daniel threw himself into his duties, quickly earning praise from management for his dedication. One evening, while closing up the front desk, Daniel noticed a group of tourists checking in. Among them was a woman in her early 30s with striking green eyes and jet black hair. She introduced herself as Claire Bennett and requested a specific room number. "Room 14, please," she said confidently, handing over her credit card. Daniel hesitated. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but room 14 is currently undergoing maintenance. Would you mind staying in room 7 instead?" Claire frowned but nodded reluctantly. "Sure, that works." Later that night, as Daniel prepared to lock up, he noticed something odd. A piece of paper slid under the front desk, landing silently at his feet. Curious, he picked it up and unfolded it. On the page, written in shaky handwriting, were the same 5 words Emily had left behind years ago. "Never go to room 3. Chills ran down Daniel's spine. He glanced toward the staircase leading to the second floor, half expecting to see someone standing there. But the hallway was empty. Determined to uncover the truth, Daniel ventured upstairs cautiously. As he approached room 3, he noticed the same scratch marks Detective Reed had documented years earlier. They appeared fresh, as though they'd been made moments ago. Summoning his courage, Daniel pressed his ear against the door, listening intently. From beyond the wood, he heard faint whisper-soft, indistinct voices murmuring in unison. The sound sent shivers coursing through his body. Before he could retreat, the door creaked open slowly, revealing a darkened interior illuminated only by moonlight streaming through a cracked window. Inside, the air felt colder, heavier, suffocating. And then, just as Daniel stepped inside, the whispers grew louder, forming a single repeated phrase, "You shouldn't have come here." Back at the front desk, Claire waited anxiously, pacing back and forth. Something about the inn unsettled her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. When Daniel finally returned, pale-faced and trembling, she demanded answers. "What's going on?" she asked sharply. Daniel hesitated before speaking. "There's something wrong with room 3. I think whoever stays here doesn't leave." Claire stared at him, disbelief etched across her features. "Are you serious? This isn't some prank, is it?" "No," Daniel replied firmly. "I swear it's true, and now I think you might know more than you're letting on." Reluctantly, Claire admitted the truth. Years ago, she had stayed at the Maplewood Inn under a different name. Like Emily, she too had encountered the shadowy figure outside room 3 and written the same warning. But unlike Emily, she had managed to escape barely. Together, Daniel and Claire resolved to solve the mystery once and for all. Armed with flashlights and recording equipment borrowed from local paranormal enthusiasts, they entered room 3 determined to confront whatever dwelled within. What they found defied explanation. In the center of the room stood a mirror-ran antique piece with ornate gold framing and a surface marred by cracks. Surrounding it were remnants of rituals, long-forgotten burnt candles, scattered herbs, and symbols etched into the floorboards. As they examined the artifacts, the temperature plummeted further. Shadows danced along the walls, taking shape and form. And then, emerging from the mirror itself, came the figure, the same one Emily and Claire had seen years ago. Its presence filled the room with dread. It spoke not with words, but with emotions raw and overwhelming. Grief, anger, regret. Through careful observation and research, Daniel and Claire eventually uncovered the tragic history of Room 3. Decades prior, a young mother had taken her own life in despair after losing her child to illness. Bound by guilt and sorrow, her spirit remained trapped between worlds, luring others into her eternal torment. With the help of a seasoned medium, they performed a ritual to release the tormented soul, allowing it to find peace at last. Afterward, the Maplewood Inn returned to normalcy. Guests checked in and out without incident. Yet, deep within its walls, remnants of the past lingered a reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved. And whenever someone asks about Room 3, the staff always replies with the same advice: never go to Room 3. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. On a quiet, moonless night, a young driver named John found himself cruising alone on a desolate stretch of road, far from the lights and noise of the bustling city. The highway was long and empty, lined with thick, shadowy trees that seemed to swallow up the dim light from his car's headlights. The silence around him was eerie, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional sound of tires rolling over the cracked asphalt. It was the kind of road where time felt suspended, and the loneliness of the journey could easily make one's thoughts drift into the unknown. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? John had been driving for hours, heading toward a small town on the outskirts. He had been on the road for so long that the passing landscape had become a blur of shadows, trees, and occasional roadside markers. The monotony of the drive was starting to get to him, but he couldn't help but press forward. There was something oddly calming about the solitude, even though the dark surroundings began to weigh on him as the night deepened. As he drove through a particularly secluded area of the highway, his eyes caught a flicker of movement on the side of the road. He squinted, trying to make out what it was. There, standing on the shoulder, was a figura young woman, dressed in a long, white, somewhat tattered dress. Her back was turned and her head was slightly bowed, as though she were lost in thought or waiting for someone. John's first instinct was to pass by, but something about the sight of her in the middle of nowhere stopped him. The road was deserted, and it didn't make sense that someone would be out there, alone and stranded. John slowed the car and rolled down his window, the cold night air rushing in. He leaned out, squinting to get a better look at the woman. "Are you all right?" He called out, his voice cutting through the silence. The woman slowly turned her head toward him, and their eyes met. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes seemed distant, as if they held secrets John couldn't fathom. Her lips barely parted as she spoke in a soft, almost inaudible voice. "I'm lost," she said. "Can you give me a ride? I need to get to my house." John hesitated for a moment, but then, feeling a sudden surge of compassion, he unlocked the passenger door and gestured for her to come inside. "Of course. It's too dangerous to be out here alone," he replied. The woman gave him a small, faint smile and opened the door to get in. As she slid into the car, John immediately noticed the strange chill that seemed to surround her, like the temperature had dropped several degrees. He tried to dismiss it, attributing it to the cool night air, but there was something undeniably eerie about the encounter. The woman didn't speak much at first. She just sat there, staring straight ahead, her hands folded quietly in her lap. John glanced over at her, wondering about her story. "Where are you headed?" he asked, attempting to break the silence. "My home," she replied, her voice still soft, but with a strange edge. "It's not too far from here. I'll tell you when we get closer." John nodded, though he couldn't help but feel a slight unease creeping in. Her mannerisms were odd. There was something unsettling about her calmness, about how she spoke so quietly, almost as if she was somewhere far away in her mind. As they continued down the empty highway, John tried to make conversation, asking her where she was coming from and if she had been traveling long.